Welcome to this special edition of Cronkite News. I'm Demetria Pilatos. Thanks for joining us. Cronkite News is the only Arizona news organization with a permanent news bureau in the nation's capital. Here's a look back at some of our Washington coverage so far this year.
Arizona, a state that is 1/3 Latino, hasn't had a statewide elected official with a Hispanic last name in 40 years. Democratic gubernatorial candidate David Garcia is looking to change that this fall. Garcia was in Washington this week, where Cronkite News reporter Shelby Lindsay caught up with him.
David Garcia is Hispanic and a Democrat, two things that would normally work against him in Arizona. But in 2018, he's using both to his advantage.
Latinos have had to play defense for a couple decades now. We've had to come out and vote against Joe Arpaio, vote against Senate Bill 1070. When was the last time Latinos had something to vote for?
Garcia believes he can bring voters to the polls by giving them something to vote for and not against.
You can't broadcast that energy. It's already harnessed out there in Arizona. It's happening, and it's going to be a huge part of, like I said, what gets us over the top.
Current Governor Doug D.C. has a commanding lead over Garcia in finances. But the Democrat says his message is resonating with individual donors.
We have a rigged economy and a rigged government in Arizona. It's working for a few people at the top. It's not working for most of Arizona, and so we're going to change that.
Political analyst Jeffrey Skelly agrees that there are things in Garcia's favor, but says he faces significant hurdles too, not the least of which is a high-profile Senate race that will draw attention from the governor's election.
So the governor's race, if you're a Democrat trying to fundraise, that's going to steal some of your thunder. In Arizona specifically, no incumbent governor has lost in Arizona since 1966.
Garcia hopes to increase voter turnout and hammer down on issues of health care, immigration, and redistricting.
There's thousands of teachers and bus drivers and sanitation workers who are ready to change Arizona. It is that grassroots energy that we're going to tap into.
In Washington, Shelby Lindsay, Cronkite News.
Garcia was in Washington this week along with Democratic gubernatorial candidates from Florida and Georgia to receive the endorsement of People for the American Way. Overprescribing painkillers is one of the issues driving the opioid crisis, Attorney General Jeff Sessions said in a speech to the major county sheriffs of America today. Cronkite News reporter Austin Bunny spoke with an Arizona sheriff who attended the address.
Sessions encouraged the major county sheriffs of America to get tough on doctors who overprescribe painkillers, promising that the Justice Department will continue to aid communities combating the crisis.
But I've been stunned by the number of doctors that are criminally overprescribing and being indicted, and we're going to have a lot more indicted.
Pima County Sheriff Mark Napier welcomed the Attorney General's message today, but said the federal government isn't doing enough to financially support local law enforcement in fighting the battle.
The opioid crisis, we're simply not seeing that money trickle down to the local level where local sheriffs and local elected officials can say, this is the problem in our county, this is where we need to put those monies to use.
President Donald Trump declared the opioid crisis a national health emergency last year, and Arizona Governor Doug D.C. in January called for a special session of the legislature to address that emergency. But so far, no changes to policy or funding have occurred on the federal level. Sessions today called on sheriffs to continue enforcing laws and getting criminals off the streets in regards to opioids, but Napier thinks more good can be done through education instead of pure enforcement.
We don't want stability in this problem, and it's not going to be simply an enforcement approach. We cannot arrest our way through this problem.
In Washington, Austin Bundy, Cronkite News.
Border wall backers say environmental regulations that get in the way of wall construction should be lifted. A proposal strongly opposed by environmentalists. Now lawmakers are asking if those regulations get in the way of border enforcement and should be lifted as well. Cronkite News reporter Ariana Bustos was at that hearing today in Washington.
Nogales rancher Dan Bell argues that the best way to help the environment may be by removing environmental protections to give Border Patrol agents more access.
A lot of the problems that we have associated with the environment is a lot of trash and trails that are on the landscape due to illegal immigration that's passing through the area.
Bell, the president of the ZZ Cattle Corporation, said illegal immigration makes his land a dumping ground. Brandon Judd, president of the National Border Patrol Council, testified alongside Bell and said agents can stop the cycle before it begins.
If you give agents the access that they need, we can stop that, which will actually protect these lands a great deal more than what we're currently doing.
But Scott Nichols said you have to weigh the effects. The co-chair of the Sierra Club Borderlands team said that permanent structures like roads and a wall would be much worse than trash.
It's a matter of degree. You know, the trash is a problem, but the infrastructure that's been built and that has been proposed has a far greater environmental impact.
Nicole also said he thinks that the degree of illegal immigration has been exaggerated.
Apprehensions have been declining steadily year upon year for a number of years now. We're at the lowest level since the 1970s. So the broader argument that we have to throw everything at the border, we have to inflict all these impacts upon the border, it doesn't have an empirical basis.
Bell disagrees.
It's not exaggerated. They're coming through, and they're coming through the remote areas where we have increased border security. They are using the areas that are more remote now, and so it is still a problem, and it'll continue to be a problem. So that's why we need to keep pushing forward.
In Washington, Adriana Bustos, Cronkite News.
Tribal schools have long been troubled, but the director of the Bureau of Indian Education told a congressional committee today that things will improve, even with funding cuts in the Trump administration's proposed budget. Not all lawmakers were buying that pitch, as Cronkite News reporter Ariana Bustos explains from our Washington bureau.
Congressman Raul Grijalva's description of the BIE director Tony Dearman's testimony was blunt. He called it pretty naive.
For him to say that I'm excited about the fact that Trump cut our budget by 16%, to me made no sense.
Grijalva said more cuts will only make a bad situation worse.
We have a $1.3 billion backlog of repairs, of schools that aren't even connected to the internet and don't have access to the internet, and you also have the situation where they're in disrepair.
But Congressman Todd Rokita said the problem isn't the money, but how that money is being used. The Indiana Republican agreed with Dearman that everyone has to live within their budget. While he respects tribal sovereignty, Rokita says the federal government shouldn't be afraid to step in and offer support to tribes.
A lot of tribal communities absolutely want that, and I think they should have it. Then I find some tribal communities, frankly, we won't name names or anything like that, but I'd say no. This is the federal government's role, their responsibility, and regardless of the quality of the education, BIEs to do the job.
Dearman said in his testimony that tribes can and should have total control of their funds. But Grijalva says the government can both respect tribal sovereignty and support them financially.
Self-determination and sovereignty does not mean that the federal government's support in terms of resources and money disappears with that decision. If a tribe decides to be the primary person to run and administer the schools, I think the support that comes from the federal government to those schools has to continue.
Reporting from Washington, Ariana Bustos, Cronkite News.
Some Special Olympians from Arizona and their supporters are making their rounds of congressional offices in Washington today. It's a part of a national effort to lobby for better health access for Americans with disabilities. Reporter Shelby Lindsay met with some standout Arizona athletes supporting the cause.
Dustin Swinson is not afraid of a challenge. The unified sports athlete competes in bowling and soccer at Verrado High School. His latest challenge is coming to Washington, D.C. this week to lobby for money to support the Special Olympics programs.
This is for the little kids who may have disabilities, just like I do.
Swinson and other athletes are here to urge Congress to continue its support in the 2019 budget. Their goal is to improve health access for 5 million Americans with intellectual disabilities. Laura Duncan, an Arizona Special Olympics employee, said the Healthy Athletes program makes a huge impact in the state.
Arizona serves 25,000 athletes statewide, and all 25 of those athletes have access to health care through the Healthy Athletes program.
Kyle Wellman, a unified sports partner for the Special Olympics at Verrado High School, shared what they do to bring students together.
What Unified Sports does is we take a partner which is a kid without special needs, and then partner them with an athlete who is somebody with an intellectual disability or physical disability.
Kyle is passionate about the program and had a message.
I've been able to go into my school and meet some really, really incredible kids that I wouldn't have met anyways. It's not a pity thing. It's not I'm volunteering. These are my friends. These are people that I care about, and that I think it's important that everybody understands how important the inclusion part of it is.
As the largest healthcare provider for individuals with intellectual disabilities, the Special Olympics said government support is crucial in order to provide these opportunities.
To help us fund for the Special Olympics so we could keep the whole program going. As it continues to help disability kids in the future and to help their families too.
In Washington, Shelby Lindsay, Cronkite News.
From victims demanding change to the recurring gun debate, the national discussion is echoing the aftermath of another shooting that targeted members of Congress. 8 months ago, Cronkite News reporter Noelle Lilly, who was there that day, returns to the nation's capital for this story.
As the weeks and months go by, those who survive a mass shooting still struggle to recover. I traveled back to Washington, D.C. to check on Arizona Senator Jeff Flake and others who had to duck for cover as a gunman opened fire.
In my mind, I said, those are gunshots. Those can't be gunshots.
We looked at each other and we both yelled gun, and everyone started running in different ways.
He was out there laying on the grass while we were, ducking in the dugout with gunfire above us.
June 14th began like any other morning. It was the day before the 2017 congressional baseball game, and the Republican team was practicing in Alexandria, Virginia.
9 minutes after 7 o'clock, we received a 911 call of an active shooter.
3 men from different walks of life all arrived at Eugene Simpson Stadium Park. But when 66-year-old James Hodgkinson, armed with a rifle and a handgun, stepped onto the baseball diamond, the morning quickly turned dangerous.
Everything about that morning was just a little off.
David Woodruff has lived in Alexandria for 10 years. Usually an evening runner, on this day he decided to hit the street in the morning.
I was running down the street, down Braddock, and was coming right by the stadium here, and suddenly heard gunshots, and a series of gunshots going out and going out and going out.
Woodruff was not the only bystander searching for safety. I was there too. Where this morning, U.S. Representative from the state of Louisiana, Steve Scalise, was shot. I was standing near my vehicle near Leslie and Monroe, and I could hear the gunshots ring out behind me. I ducked behind my car for safety, and as I popped back up, I could see the congressmen and representatives running around on the field, ducking for safety and hiding in the dugout. Others, like Arizona Senator Jeff Flake, were much closer to the line of fire.
It was a full 8 minutes of shooting, where you have time to think. It seemed like a lot longer, I can tell you, before the shooter was taken down.
Looking back, Flake says the first thing he thought about was his family.
When bullets going over your head, you're thinking of your family. You think about what's most important to you.
While Senator Flake was not shot that day, others, like Matt and Mika, weren't so lucky.
The Sandlot, a baseball field, is supposed to be a safe haven for kids and adults and a place to play.
Mika played baseball in college and was one of the volunteer coaches for the Republican team.
There was 5 of us that were shot that day. It was Steve Scalise, myself, Bailey got shot in the leg, Griner got shot in the ankle, and then Zach Barth. I just happened to be in the wrong spot at the wrong time.
Mika says his healing process has been a gradual one.
I look normal, but I look better than I feel. People that go through something like this, that get shot, it takes a long time to heal. I'll probably have 6 months to another year of PT and working out and getting back to where I was.
Mayor Allison Silberberg says this kind of violence is uncommon to a city like Alexandria.
It was shocking, it is shocking, but we immediately showed how resilient we are, and we are extremely strong as a city.
Those near the incident say progress has been made to move past this shooting.
For as bad as that 10 to 15 minutes was, everything that happened after was a miracle. I say the man above has a better plan for me and everyone else, so hopefully we can all move forward with our lives. And I'm not going to let this define me, but it's going to make me a better person as I move forward with my life.
You just find out that people are good everywhere, and they want to give you their best. And when people get hurt and go through an experience like that, it really brings out the best in everybody.
For now, it seems like everyone is looking to the future.
We have all worked to make certain that we can reclaim that, and again, make certain that this great little ballpark can go back to just simply being a great little ballpark.
Capitol Hill police officers and Alexandria police fired back at the shooter. He was later taken to the hospital where he died from his injuries. According to the FBI, law enforcement also found a piece of paper on the shooter that listed the names of 6 members of Congress. Laws have since been introduced as a direct result of this shooting. Laws such as H.R. 2951, which allows members of Congress to carry a concealed handgun anywhere in the country. Noelle Lilly, Cronkite News.
The debate goes on across the country. Are sports teams that use Native American mascots engaging in racism or respect? The issue is playing out in spring training this year as Cronkite News reporter Ariana Bustos follows the story.
When the Cleveland Indians train in Goodyear this spring, you'll see a lot of this, and this. But you won't see a lot of this. The Indians had already distanced themselves from the Chief Wahoo logo in Goodyear, but are now taking the next step, announcing earlier this year the team would phase out the Chief Wahoo logo by 2019. Arizona House Representative Eric DeSheeney says it was the right thing to do.
It's a step in the right direction. I'm looking to see them sprint in the right direction.
Jackson Brossi, executive director of the Navajo Nation Washington office, said the removal should have been done long before now.
It's about time. It's about time, and should have been done a long time ago. If that picture had been any other ethnic group in the United States, we wouldn't be talking about this today. This is 2018. It's crazy.
The Indians will remove the logo completely from uniforms and facilities after this season. However, in order to maintain the trademark, the team has to use it in some capacity, which means some Chief Wahoo items will still be sold in Goodyear and the Cleveland area. Brossi isn't happy with that.
If they want to make money off of racist merchandise, that's their problem. Yeah.
DeSheeney, the director of tribal government relations for Navajo Country, hopes that the removal of this logo can inspire other teams, like the Washington Redskins, to reconsider their own controversial images.
On a local level, certainly we appreciate that, but we're talking on a national scale. It doesn't change it much when it's happening elsewhere, you know. And it's just like, as Martin Luther King used to say, you know, an injustice anywhere is an injustice everywhere.
Ariana Bustos, Cronkite News.
When we reached out to the team for comment, officials referred us to a statement that called the decision to retire Chief Wahoo a difficult one for the team, but the right one.
Arizona Governor Doug Ducey was among dozens of state leaders at the White House today. Shelby Lindsay is tracking the governor's conference from our Washington bureau. Shelby?
The meeting between the nation's governors and the president was supposed to touch on a range of topics, but the shooting at a Parkland, Florida high school quickly dominated the discussion.
President Donald Trump said he met with key officials of the National Rifle Association who want to do something to address the issue of school safety.
The NRA, they're on our side. You guys know you were so afraid of the NRA. There's nothing to be afraid of. And you know what? If they're not with you, we have to fight them every once in a while. That's okay.
Trump's message was generally well received, but Washington Governor Jay Inslee had other thoughts.
Just suggest we need a little less tweeting here, a little more listening, and let's just take that off the table and move forward.
Trump spoke about the numerous ideas for stopping gun violence that have surfaced since the shooting, including arming educators, improving background checks for gun purchases, and raising the minimum age for purchasing assault-style weapons. Florida Governor Rick Scott shared his plan to make schools safer.
We're going to have mental health counselors in every school to make sure that all of our students can go through counseling or meet with a mental health counselor as often as they want.
Trump was confident arming a small percentage of teachers will secure schools.
They have to know. They walk in, they're going to probably end up dead. And if they know they're going to end up dead, they're not going into that school.
We reached out to Arizona Governor Doug Ducey after the White House meeting, but he was unavailable for comment. In Washington, Shelby Lindsay, Cronkite News.
The U.S. Justice Department has a new plan for targeting the opioid crisis by taking aim at manufacturers and distributors of the powerful painkillers. Cronkite News reporter Shelby Lindsay is tracking today's announcement in Washington.
Attorney General Jeff Sessions has a solution for fixing the problem: a lawsuit against any unlawful opioid distributor across the nation. Sessions, flanked by attorneys general from states hardest hit by opioids, said the crisis cost the U.S. more than $115 billion last year, and it's just going to get worse.
Over the next 3 years, this crisis will cost another $500 billion.
In Arizona, new data from the Department of Health Services shows that in January alone, there were more than 400,000 opioid prescriptions dispensed in the state. In an effort to slow the spread of opioids in the state, the legislature last month imposed a 5-day limit on first-time opioid prescription, while providing $10 million to help get treatment for those with little or no health insurance. Sessions' plan targets overprescriptions as well.
The pill task force will focus in particular on targeting opioid manufacturers and distributors who have contributed to this epidemic.
But Pennsylvania Attorney General Josh Shapiro joined others at the event who said law enforcement is only part of the solution.
I believe that addiction is a disease, not a crime, which is why we have to work together to make sure that those who have accepted personal responsibilities have avenues to treatment.
We reached out to Arizona Attorney General Mark Brnovich, but he was unavailable for comment Tuesday. In Washington, Shelby Lindsay, Cronkite News.
Some other state officials are taking a different tack on federal health care funding. States like Arizona say they can make health care dollars go further if they have flexibility in how programs are run. Ariana Bustos in our Washington bureau takes a closer look at so-called Medicaid waivers.
Section 1115 demonstration waivers allow states to expand and experiment with their Medicaid programs. But Arizona has operated its Medicaid agency through an experimental program for 36 years. 99.7% of the state's Medicaid expenditures are now spent on programs run under such waivers. Tom Betlock, director of Arizona's Medicaid agency, says that's because it works.
We have one of the lowest costs in the United States, well below the national average as it relates to Medicaid spending. Part of our success is our ability within our long-term care program to deliver services to our members in a home and community-based setting, because it costs about a third of what it costs to serve somebody in a nursing facility.
Betlock spoke at a panel on Capitol Hill this week to defend the use of waivers and promote state flexibility. But a recent Government Accountability Office report says there is not enough evaluation being done on the success or failure of the waivers. Catherine Iritani, Director of Healthcare at GAO, says the demonstrations are intended as research, and states like Arizona need to show results.
Evaluations are an important part of the use of the authority from the standpoint of actually learning from these demonstrations.
Betlock says the problem is the waiver process as a whole.
I guess it identified some concerns as it relates to Arizona's waiver. What I think it's really reflective of is the fact that the existing 1115 waiver process is broken and needs to be fixed by Congress.
Betlock says Congress should make Arizona's demonstration programs permanent instead of renewing them again and again.
It should be fixed to recognize the permanency of programs like Arizona that have successfully shown how they can use 1115 waivers to benefit the population that we serve and the taxpayers who pay for our program.
Reporting from Washington, Ariana Bustos, Cronkite News.
Mourners gathered today at the U.S. Capitol, where the late Reverend Billy Graham lay in honor in the rotunda. Graham died at the age of 99 last week after decades of advising presidents and preaching to millions worldwide. Shelby Lindsay reports from our Washington bureau.
It'll be hours until the people in line behind me will be able to pay their respects to Reverend Billy Graham. For Arizona residents Crystal Van Dyke and Jamie Woolridge, it is well worth the wait.
Today's climate, when you hear all of these scandals going on, we just thought, this is somebody who lived out his faith, who was about saving souls, sharing the good news, and I thought that's a rare opportunity to take time out to come pay respects.
As they waited to pay their respects, the two women from Phoenix shared what Graham meant to them.
Just a pillar of our faith in our generation.
Graham is only the fourth civilian to lie in honor in the U.S. Capitol, and the first to do so since Rosa Parks was honored here in 2005. Graham will lie in honor in the U.S. Capitol Rotunda until early Thursday morning. Reporting from Capitol Hill, Shelby Lindsay, Cronkite News.
The White House was expected to unveil proposals today to help stop school gun violence, one day after President Donald Trump chided Republicans for being afraid of the National Rifle Association. We're still waiting for that announcement, but as Austin Bundy reports, the change in tone from the White House was welcomed by Arizona Senator Jeff Flake.
Arizona Senator Jeff Flake said this morning that he welcomes word the White House will be putting forth gun safety measures and that the president has to lead the way for anything to be passed in Congress.
His leadership here is really critical if it's going to get through the House and the Senate. I hope this time, and I do think there's a better chance this time, that the president will lead and really get out front on this. And there are a couple of items that we can make progress on.
Flake has a couple of items of his own. He has co-sponsored bills banning bump stocks, preventing individuals on the government's no-fly list from buying guns, and raising the age to buy a gun from 18 to 21. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer called on Republicans this afternoon to leave their comfort zones and defy the National Rifle Association.
The first step is the president. We all know that the NRA has held the Republican Party in a vice lock. We also know that our Republican friends try to sort of wiggle through this by doing something minor that doesn't get the NRA upset.
But Flake said it's going to take a wide range of legislation to fix the problem.
You'll get a small portion there. The bump stocks have only been used once in one shooting, but it was an awful, awful shooting. That needs to be done. If you do the no-fly, no-buy list, you've taken care of another segment. So I think there's a number of things that we can do, and if we do them all, I think we'll make a difference.
In Washington, Austin Bundy, Cronkite News.
Thanks for joining us for this special edition of Cronkite News. For top Arizona stories anytime, go to cronkitenews.azpbs.org.
I'm Jose Cardenas, host of Horizonte. Each week we bring you experts and community leaders to discuss the issues that are vital to our community here in Arizona. We cover the stories that affect and inspire us and our families, and talk to the newsmakers who shape the communities where we live. Horizonte is your source and your voice for what matters most here on Arizona PBS.